Okay.
Well, I'm delighted to welcome Andrea Andrews to the podcast. I'm going to be taking a deep dive, if you'll excuse the pun. Um, Andrea, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Stuart. Yeah.
Um, so we were just talking before I pressed record, and as usual, the danger is we'd have all the good stuff done before the recording button is pressed. Wouldn't have been the first time I've had a really great conversation with somebody and not pressed record and thought, oh my God, that would have made an amazing podcast. But I wonder if you wouldn't mind just maybe starting off with your backstory and tell me a little bit about yourself and tell the listeners a bit about kind of the work that you do and what you're up to.
Okay. Yes. Basically, I started off as a swimming teacher, and I got a bit interested in doing things a bit differently because when I was a child, when I was a child, I had an amazing experience. I think I was about the age of 12, and my brother was 9 years old. And my parents always said to me, you've got to look after your brother when you go swimming, wherever you go. And I really took that to heart massively. And we did a lot of swimming in water bodies across Europe. Mostly it was France. My parents we used to get on the ferry at the beginning of the summer holidays and then come back, basically dry out for the rest of the year. But also, I was brought up in Dorset as well. And that is a stunning place for anything aquatic. It's got so much variety. Um, and yeah, so going back to this incident that I had when I was 12 years old, I was in a beautiful pool south of France, and my brother said to me, Andy, I want to walk to the deep end, on the bottom. And I went, oh, I can see that's not going to work, but okay, we'll give it a go. So we started to have a go at it, and it was really hard, obviously, because you float right up. You can't stay on the bottom very easily, and you have to come up for air. But basically, we got to the deep end, and we'd been having a good laugh. And then all of a sudden, he came up to me, he swam up to me, and he held my hands, and he pulled on my hands a little bit and just got a little bit of air. We were just hanging in the middle of the deep end. And until that point, because I'd been looking after him, I'd always had a little bit of a knot in my stomach about being in deep water. And it's really interesting. We were doing this, what I call seesawing. So it's where he was pulling down on my hands a little bit. I was getting a little bit of air when I was doing the same. So we were just smiling at each other. It was the most amazing feeling, absolutely mind blowing. Because even now I can go back there to know what it feels like, and I could feel like the sun on my head because it was really hot on my head. And yeah, and that experience I now realize years later is is what I've been chasing for other people. And it's the sort of thing where you can't just take someone from not being a confident swimmer to go and do that in the middle of the deep end. That's not going to work. So it's been a long trail of trying to work out how to reach people to explain this sensation and its importance, because it's turned out that I was very shy as a child. I was very mousy, very quiet person. And then, as I went through my teenagehood, I found some leadership skills in there, which is, it's from someone also who had quite a lot of fear of water when learning to swim. Absolutely loved it. Learned a little bit late, round about, I think I took my feet off the floor when I was about 8, whereas everyone else was way off the floor already. So there's a lot of factors in there which are really interesting. Um, I did a bit of club swimming as well, um, but not for long because I just didn't like the sensation of water being swept over my face all the time. Um, because I was quite asthmatic as a kid as well. So then did lifeguarding, loved that. That was brilliant. Did a little bit of swimming teaching. And then what did I do? Ended up working, not in swimming, ended up doing a geology degree. So I've got a sort of a heavy scientific background in geology and hydrogeology, groundwater chemistry, that type of thing. And as I was working as a soil engineer until I had my kids and realized that actually um, that wasn't going to be a very good industry to go back to having two kids. So looked around, I thought, what shall I do? And then my daughter swam towards me, sort of spontaneously, said, Mummy, look what I can do. And I thought, I want some of that. That's that's where I'm going. So then qualified in 2003, 2004 for my main swimming teaching qualifications, and thought to myself, not sure about the way everyone's being asked to teach people to swim. I did not feel good with it. I see you smiling away there, Stuart. And I thought to myself, you know what, I'm going to give this a go on my own, So I set up a little swim school in Henley-on-Thames, in a place called the Trinity Trainer Pool, which was really sweet. It's like a little old building with a pool you have to walk up into, And that was with mums and babies, toddlers, preschoolers, and we had an absolute ball. It was fantastic. I learned masses in there. They taught me loads about how to reach them, how to help them become more aquatic, as I call it. And then I had to sell my business, unfortunately, because my husband wanted to go to America. Well, in fact, I couldn't sell it. I had to hand it over, which is pretty devastating. And yeah, so when I was in America, I didn't have a working visa, so I couldn't work over there. But I met lots of people who are into swimming, and I met a couple of teachers. One was British, another was Texan, and we decided we'd go and do some training to help afraid adults with a specialist course. It was all about fears and how to overcome them. And that was with a woman called Melon Dash, based in Sarasota in Florida. And it was fantastic. It was like a real justification for the approaches I'd been taking already in the pool. You know, there was so much I'd been doing instinctively, and it was a real sort of confidence boost. Yeah, I can do this, it's justified because when you hear afraid adults and how small things really impact them, and the sorts of horrendous things that have happened to them over the years, that put them off. And yeah, it's a real eye opener. In some ways, I wish that every swimming teacher could go through what I've been through, because they would really understand what not to do, and also how to support these people, how to help them adjust, become more what's the word, sort of, yeah, confident in themselves, that they're actually born to swim, which I believe most people are. I can't think of anyone who shouldn't be able to enjoy themselves in the water, really. especially after watching the Paralympics, seeing, my husband and I, we watched somebody swim a super fast length. And he had one arm, and that was just about it. And my husband said, "Oh my God, he can swim it faster than me." It's just, it's fantastic. So the definition of swimming is an interesting thing as well.
So you did
Yeah.
catch me. You did catch me smiling, because I knew this conversation was going to be really enjoyable, and obviously you've touched on areas that I've definitely spoken about, probably a bit ad nauseum on the podcast. But this is the first time I think I've probably had a conversation with someone from the aquatics world. That's not quite true, actually. There's been others, but that quite resonates and maps onto my own experiences around aquatics. So along similar lines, I was very fortunate that in my younger day, when I was younger, my father had a couple of contracts abroad, one in Africa and one in um, Polynesia, where I'm at 5 years old, and you're in the pool every day, you're at the beach every day, you're in water every day. Same when I was like 8, 9, 10. And nobody taught us. Nobody. You never had you didn't know no such thing. You just got in the pool and went for it. And again, little brother, we got into some scrapes, and all that sort of stuff. But a kind of similar experience, the joy of
Yeah.
exploring, the kind of the aquatic world. Some of it, obviously in a pool, but other times, with wildlife around you. So very fortunate. But as a result of that, my level of water confidence was just sky high, like so much more so than many of my peers who'd had formal swimming lessons as part of the statutory requirement in this country. Um, and I'd be like doing all sorts, like for example, I'd have kids who still hold their nose to jump in and can't roll over underwater without getting water in the nose and their eyes and this, that, and the other. And I'm like, that's so much fun. You're missing out on so much of it. Anyway, so without me waxing lyrical, those experiences really mapped on. And so I'd love to know more about. Firstly, the other thing that made me laugh as well was you did, like so many people who've come on this podcast, they do some formal education that you have to do in order to be, in inverted commas, qualified. But then the reality is you find that what you've learned in that educational thing really doesn't map on to the kind of real world experiences that people are looking for, and doesn't really serve them that well. So what you've had to do is get your formal qualification, kind of disregard to a certain extent most of what you've learned, apart from all the safety elements and all that sort of stuff, and then essentially provide an alternative paradigm for people who've got very, very different needs. And that's partly why I wax lyrical about the need for coach education to modernise. But likewise, I'd just be interested to know really about what your how that felt really, because you what you've basically said is I got a qualification and then I really started learning,
Yeah.
like so many people say.
Yeah. Well, what it was like, well, when I was doing the qualification, which I did with a wonderful lady, she started off by asking everyone to write down, when we sat down, she said, "Well, write down why you're here." And that was a powerful exercise because I looked around and I thought, oh God, there's people from sports centres, and I thought, oh, there's some people who are clearly competitive swimming people, and I was thinking, why am I here? And I thought my stuff was about, I just want people to enjoy the water, basically, and I want some more of what I got with my daughters, which was to help little kids get a joy from a really young age. So when I then went off to do my main, my main work, the places where I could work, it was all about, there was a gap. The children were starting a lot later. And they just, a lot of them were really rigid. The whole setup for for the lessons was really noisy. It was very jarring. It was jarring for me. I couldn't hear very much, and if I had to stand on the side when there's a lot of children in the water, I used to absolutely hate that sensation of just being so separated from them. But over the years, I decided to myself that really the environment didn't matter. It became about how to meet them where they were. It didn't matter what state they were in, really. My job was to just sort of make sure that they felt that they deserved to be there. They were going to get something out of it, and I wasn't going to push them. That last bit is the key, that I wasn't going to push them. And I sort of ended up being a sort of I don't know what you'd call it, like a shield
Yeah.
to protect their learning journey against everyone else. So it would be about if the centre that I was working at said, right, well, you have to have 8 people in there instead of 6. I'd say, no, hang on a minute, that's not going to work. Stick up for them, and
Yeah.
also stick up for them against their parents as well, who would often, if they were really nervous, then there would often be a very either a very nervous, quiet adult watching, or someone who's really on their case. And that's hard. That's really hard because, they've hardly got any clothes on. They're shoved out there with people they don't know. And it's just, it's like, no, it just doesn't feel right. So yeah, to be able to then go to one side and try my own thing was amazing. That was really freeing. I thought it was an absolute joy to be able
Yeah.
to help people directly and do what I wanted to do and experiment as well, you know.
Then the other thing I was struck by was you then you went on a training course later on
Yeah.
where you essentially felt validated for your own ideas by the virtue of the fact that there was somebody else out there articulating similar notions of how people learn and all that sort of stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it was fascinating because a lot of the people who were learning as adults, afraid adults, a lot of them were very high flying people. And it was fascinating to see how that seemed to correlate with a lot of aquatic trauma as well. And yeah, it was an absolute joy to watch them change. There's nothing like it. It's completely addictive. It's because obviously you can change people's lives with this thing, because it's about emotional regulation, really. The whole swimming process is about being able to build internal self-control in an immersive environment, not always warm enough. you know
Yeah.
a lot of challenging things happen, a lot of surprising things. If you've never been in water for any length of time, it is a major challenge for people, and it changes them. Once they've learned to swim, then they'll ring you or send you a message and say, oh my God, I've learned to drive. I never thought I could do that. Or I've learned the piano, or you wouldn't believe what I've done. I've been to the Maldives and I've done a bit of scuba diving. It's, yeah, transforms them. It's a brilliant thing.
That notion of aquatic trauma, like, are these people who've had traumatic experiences and that's what's fueled their fear?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, most of them. Although there are some people who haven't had any traumatic experience themselves, but they've had family members drown, or it basically, it's by proxy. It's a secondary fear, and sometimes that can be even worse than someone who has had a bad experience. Um, until they actually get to the water, and then you introduce them to it at their pace, and then they are fast learners because they realize that they haven't built up any um, negative experiences which are retained in the body.
Okay.
Those Nothing's been embodied, so they really learn quite quickly, which is great as well, obviously, for them, because some of them will have been doing things like not driving over a bridge, you know, driving
Really?
15 miles around so that they don't have to go over a bridge they don't like,
That
you
level
know.
of fear, even going over
Yeah,
water, was too traumatic.
yeah,
Wow.
yeah.
That's amazing. So you just said something that really piqued my interest, this notion of embodied trauma.
Mm,
So
yeah,
can you expand on that for me? Because I think I know a bit about what you're talking about, but I'd love to know more.
yeah. Well, it's when we make connections in the brain from an experience, when you've not been able to make meaning out of something because it's incomplete, or you've not been able to sense it properly. You've shut yourself off, and your conscious awareness has disappeared off somewhere. You've got a gap, and that's what I mean by embodied trauma. It's almost like a trapped energy in the cells of the body, in the muscles. Um, yeah, it takes sometimes people a lot of time to actually untangle, and it's almost like there is a physiological element to it, is what I'm trying to say. I'm not making a very
Yeah.
good job of it.
No, I get it.
um yeah, so there's a lot of neural connections which need to be sort of softened, allowed to still be there, but feel more neutral than they did in the past. Because when you've had aquatic trauma, a lot of the time it never goes away. You remember it, but it can become flat. It can become neutral and no longer affect you. You can just go, oh yeah, that happened. I remember how affecting it was, but now it doesn't affect me anymore. Yeah.
So that's really interesting because as um, one of the main, I guess, thrusts of this podcast is exploring um kind of, human advancement, human performance, skill acquisition, but through the lens of um, kind of ecological psychology, which talks quite a bit about the idea of embodiment. Um, in particular, kind of what they call embodied cognition, and this notion of how, you know, a lot of skill acquisition research assumes that the kind of, the brain is a computer and motor program theory, and it basically put instructions into the brain and that magically transforms into, movement competence. And likewise, I imagine this sort of, you hear this a lot with people who've got, various forms of trauma, not trauma, sorry, various forms of like phobia, etc., or, kind of fear, that the predominant method of trying to help them deal with the fear is through language, i.e., information into the brain. But from what you're telling me, this is something, there's a kind of brain body disconnect. So on a rational level,
Mm.
this is someone who probably, on a perfectly rational way would say, I know all that, but physically something happens that's making me just like want to fall to pieces. And anyway, I'm probably speaking far too much and massively oversimplifying what we're talking about. But like, so I'm really fascinated by these notions of how, the brain isn't the central governor, always in everything that we're doing. There is what they call an embodied brain, if you like. You could call it a brain. It's not really a brain, but there is a lot happening in the body, sort of not necessarily run by rational thought, but driven by emotion and other sensations. And you clearly have first-hand experience of this.
Yeah, absolutely. It's yeah, when you talk about embodiment and ecological learning, I think it's the most powerful thing that we have. It's the biggest tool that we've got. Um, yeah, it's the embodiment process in water is it starts from, when you're in the womb, basically.
Yeah.
So the, when the baby's born, a lot of them can actually move in water. They can hold their breath. There's all sorts of things going on there. They obviously can't do anything on their own, to be left on their own for any length of time. But there is, that it's so recent that they've been in water
Yeah.
that really it's the closest thing. And also the way that we sense in water is different because obviously sound travels faster in water than it does in air.
Mm.
A lot of the learning that children do is silent and completely unconscious. It's just not so, children that learn faster tend to be deaf. A lot of deaf children learn really quickly. Autistic children have an affinity with water as well. So that tells you something straight away that the verbal side of the brain is actually not that helpful in learning to swim. And it's the other side, because I don't know whether you've heard of Dr. Ian McGilchrist's work where he talks about two hemispheres of the brain
Yeah.
in mammals. Well, almost any creature with a brain has two hemispheres. And he says, well, why is that? And it is really about having two forms of attention available to you. So if you imagine, he talks about a pigeon picking seed out of a pile of grit. What it's doing there, it's using its left hemisphere to identify what it wants to eat, and it's picking it and eating it. So it's focused on something, getting something. And then the other hemisphere is about rest and digest. It's also about look around you for wider dangers, changes, signals, mates, young. So you can understand that when we focus on using just your arms and legs, or you're focusing on doing what someone else is instructing you to do, you are only using your left hemisphere. You're not using your right hemisphere, which is drastic. Because when somebody is learning naturally in water, they are using the right hemisphere more than the left. And it's because it's receiving generalized signals from the environment. It's receiving waves of information that go through the body. They don't just touch the outside, they resonate through the body. And yeah, so being distracted with a lot of left hemisphere stuff is no good. It's going to stop you addressing what you need to know in the water, which is how does this environment work? What will happen to me if I do X, Y, and Z? Where will I get air from? There's all of these. I mean, yourself, because we learned so young to sort of be so aquatic. It's easy for us to accept, to sort of almost
express it.
dismiss how much we've
Yeah.
taken in.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah,
And it's interesting because I think you just said something there that really hits the nail on my head. I mean, I'm as a ecological dynamicist, if that's even a word, I've decided to coin
love
that
it.
word now. Um, I I might express that slightly differently, which is to say, when you're receiving verbal instruction and you're carrying out that verbal instruction, which is obviously, kind of like governed by the brain, what that does is that you're using the wrong sensory apparatus, or you're desensitizing yourself from the sensory apparatus that you need to properly experience. So your point's a really good one. So like my childhood, your childhood, because we didn't have anyone going, you need to do this and you need to do that. The only thing we had was our, kind of touch, feel,
Yeah,
hearing, and so, kinesthesia, all these sorts of notions, right? There's, you can go through a list of different senses that we have. Um, I did make a list one day. I've got some slides on. I can't remember them all. There's 21 apparently. Anyway, but like, the sense of touch on the skin
yeah,
is it's got its own title. Your point about temperature and what that does as well, and all those sorts of things. All of those things are, I can still think of them now. I can feel those sensations now. I can like evoke them. Um,
yeah,
because they were like tremendously powerful, and that's where I was. That's exactly how I. So, for example, you talk about depth. I remember exploring depth. So seeing how deep I could go, not just in a pool, but like in the sea when it's getting really quite deep. Can I get to the bottom to get that shell? Um,
yeah,
and what does it feel like if I go to the bottom? Because obviously there's pressure and you can feel the sensation of pressure. And you're exploring like where's my tolerance levels and these sorts of things. And what's it like to then get to the surface? And how far can I go down and how long can I go down before I have to come back up? And that minor sense of panic when you think that's a long way up and I haven't got enough breath left. But so those exploratory actions that just were like normal to me. And then you see kids nowadays, and like it took us a lot. We went through about 8 different swim schools for my children. No, sorry, about 4 actually, before we found one that I felt anyway, was kind of where I wanted to be, which was much more play based.
right.
So the kids were playing in water and learning as they went. Because all I had up to that point was just doing lengths. And it was just like, what?
So,
Why? So yeah,
mm,
I think I was searching unconsciously. Maybe it wasn't unconsciously or subconsciously. Maybe it wasn't. Maybe it was deliberate. But something that equated to the kind of experiences that I had.
yeah, yeah. I can resonate with that. And but also when my children were, I mean, they were pretty damn aquatic before they even went to lessons anyway. Um, but when they were there, they were there to learn strokes, but they weren't interested. And a lot of the time, I used to feel really sorry for my colleagues, because especially my younger one, she was always under the water. They'd turn around and go, right, okay, everyone, and then she would emerge, and then she'd have to explain it to her again, for her to go off and do something. And yeah, you try and seek out what you know, don't you?
Yeah.
And what's in sort of retained in your body, which is worrying, really,
Yeah.
when you consider that there's a lot of adults who are very nervous of water. So what they're actually seeking out is not going to be helpful for their kids a lot of the time, especially if the dad has had a lot of issues in water. I've seen it time and time again. I think there's an epigenetic
Yeah.
component to this,
Yeah.
that what the dad has experienced can travel down to the kids. That's the way it feels. And there's lots of, dispute about epigenetics and whether it is a real thing, etc., etc. But I really feel that there is a component there. So yeah, I mean, this is why I've spent, the last sort of 15 years trying to work out how to explain to people what I've learned, what I know about how to sort of change things in swimming lessons to try and make them more all about play, all about problem solving for fun, exploring. And there's nothing wrong with a bit of stamina building
Yeah, yeah,
by
yeah.
doing these things. It's water is a challenging thing for the body anyway, because it takes away heat. Even if it's warm water, it still takes heat out. And the body instantly is concerned about where you're going to get air from as well when you're learning. It's about survival, and that's why I find it odd in some ways that the side, the educative side of swimming instruction seems to disregard the the technical insights that people who have deep water information to share tends to sort of get filtered out all the time. It's not, people aren't so interested in it, perhaps because it may be that they feel it would take too long for those things to develop, or to be shared, effectively and clearly. And one of the reasons for that is because that a lot of the learning that goes on is silent and it's unconscious. So this is why it's taking so long for people to actually, even academics, who are working in drowning prevention, sometimes can't grasp some of the key concepts about it. And that comes down to what is in their body. What have they experienced? If they're there because they've experienced some negative experiences in deep water, and they're there to make sure people have embodied skills in front of them, or they think they have, so they can tick it off, it makes them feel better. But actually, what they need to start to explore is, can they actually embody some of those skills now, even in the age that they are? Doesn't matter how old you are, you can still improve your own skills in water. And the consequences of people assuming that they can swim, they've been told that they can swim, hundreds of meters in a nice warm pool with nice clear, crystal clear water. They end up outside somewhere in an aquatic environment, and they realize that they need somewhere to hold on to
Yeah.
because they can't float very well, or they've not spent enough time learning what happens when you float, learning what your signature is, how much effort do I need to put in, where will I go if I can't, if I can't hold on for hours, what will I do? It's just simple stuff, it's basic stuff, but it gets missed all the time. So yeah.
Yeah, so I I have a hypothesis about some of this. So, one of the things that I've challenged decision makers, policy makers, system builders within the aquatics landscape, I've challenged them on why swimming teaching largely, and I'm going to generalize obviously, but largely follows this model whereby young people are taught the formal strokes and that is what swimming teaching looks like. Now, there's probably, needless to say, this is probably multifaceted. So it's probably a societal expectation, probably follows something around government policy because it's a statutory requirement, and therefore, what might the government ask for? Maybe it's that. Maybe it's, like you said, parental expectation, because if they're paying for it, that's what they're paying for. Maybe it's also to do with the fact that there's this misguided assumption that 10,000 hours and you've got to start early learning the strokes if you're then going to be a kind of Olympic champion and this, that, and the other. I'm pretty convinced, by the way, that the Olympic performance world has influenced some of the thinking here about early introductions to swimming being based around the formal strokes as a mechanism to sort of start young people on a talent journey.
Mm.
But by the way, if that was your motivation, why would, given how many different aquatic disciplines there are, so diving, synchro, um, polo, and I'm probably forgetting a load of others, why would you not, like, introduce all aspects of the aquatic disciplines in your Learn to Swim program? So, okay, learn some strokes, but learn to dive, learn to be comfortable underwater for deep and inverted for, periods of time, a massive synchro thing, from a polo
Yeah.
perspective, play, but also learn to be able to swim and throw and everything else, so why not? Like, why wouldn't you introduce all the aquatic disciplines? Why just the formal? Um, so I feel as if, that in all sports there's dominance, isn't there? So, in athletics, the
Yeah.
sprinters get the dominant space, don't they? There's a hierarchy, isn't there? There's kind of track, throws, jumps, might be the other way around. I don't know. But you know what I mean? Like, there's always a hierarchy, isn't there? And I'm pretty certain that in the aquatics world, obviously, kind of lane swimming is the priority, and then everything else is kind of a bit of an added extra. But it's a bit frustrating though, isn't it? Because when you were telling me about your daughter wanting to be deep, I thought to myself, well, if it was me and I was thinking about it from a talent lens, synchro, brilliant, in you come.
Yeah. I mean, the like you say, the it would be amazing if they did do that. And what I do see, I mean, I went to a recent Swimming Teachers Association conference up near Derby, and then a day later they announced there's a new curriculum um going to be introduced, a new syllabus, which
Mm.
people can choose, swim schools can choose to use if they want to. And inside that syllabus, there's basically water rescue stuff. So can you throw a rope? Can you climb out at the deep end? Just the basics of the RLSS rookies, really. That
Lovely.
qualification is being sort of melded in, which I thought was quite a good thing.
Yeah.
Um, the only worry that I have about that is that we're still ignoring my end of the stuff again, which is we need to engage the right hemisphere. We need to stop trying to force everyone to be doing the same thing at the same time when
Yeah.
because they might not be ready. And that's what I'm about, is making sure that people understand their own potential and get given a voice as well, which obviously, for swimming instruction, historically, it's been where the swimming instructor knows everything, they're the expert, and you do what you're told and you do it when you're told. Whereas really my stuff is about saying, hang on a minute, not everyone that you is in front of you is going to be capable or ready to do it. And you're not going to know either, excuse me, until they tell you sometime later, unless you learn to read the signs of how, there's signals that people give off, or they tell you, or they hop to the back of a queue. There's a whole world of information. When you look at the world of aquatics, there's two natural human forms of attention in in watery circumstances. One of them is left hemisphere, shallow water engagement, moving from one point to another for survival reasons, to get out as fast as possible, to not be in the environment really, to not really engage with it deeply. And then the other is about, you see little kids wanting to get underneath and pick stuff up and play and learn to engage with the environment, to see how it works, because it's part of their world, and they want to know how it works and what's under there, what lives under there. It's a massive misstep, I think, to just shut that out, because one thing I have noticed is that if people have not had a close positive relationship of some kind with nature, the outside world, the natural outside world, then they can be at a major disadvantage for learning to swim, because they're basing their sense of safety from what they're told rather than what they feel and oh, hello.
No, it's all right. Carry on.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's something that, people almost have become sort of too domesticated in a way to be able to engage sometimes with a piece of water safely. And that obviously in my work as a drowning prevention researcher and for the Life Saving Foundation, that is a great concern to me. And I think that there's one tool which we've been using, which is great. It actually it does, in a way, it comes from a natural interest in competition and sort of what's the word, setting up yourself a challenge, see if you can do it, all of that side of us. It's a natural thing. Children also, when they're learning, they like to move a lot, and they like to jump in, climb out, and they learn dog paddle. It's their first steps of how does it work. And then the other engagement side is people all over the world, indigenous populations learn to live by foraging in water, and they are amazing what they do. It's just, it's the understanding and the sort of traditional technology that they have embodied is quite staggering. So a lot of that is just, it's cut off from us, isn't it? We don't get any access to it. So that's the idea with this tool that I've developed, is to try and show people that actually every human being really has access to another tool, and that is about taking responsibility for yourself in the water. And when you do that, what tools have you got? You've got the right to say, no, I can't do that, I'm not doing that yet, I'll do something a few steps down or a few steps back. It's about giving people that agency and trust in their own body as well, that the insights will come to them if they play, if they calm down enough, if they play enough, if they relax enough. Then so much intuitive stuff starts to flow up, and that's a very natural side as well. So, and my aim really is in the Life Saving Foundation is communication between the people that don't get they don't understand the deeper water stuff because they've never experienced it. And you can understand why you wouldn't be interested in it if you've never experienced it. And, and then because the people who love to teach the deep water slower way, engaging with the water at a pupil's own pace, so many times they don't get any room, any access in the swimming pools to teach the way they want to teach. So you end up with a very skewed, I call it a terrestrial attitude to swimming, swimming instruction. And yeah, I thought you
Um,
had that.
yeah, I do. I do. I've got to write that down. Um, See, now that's interesting though, isn't it? Because well, obviously I've noticed quite a lot of swimming teachers do so from the side.
Mm,
Now, I guess some of that's to do with heat, but I notice a lot of swimming teachers wear wetsuits, I'm assuming that's for that purpose. But the sense of like I'm not a swimming teacher, but if I was, I would find it extremely difficult to teach swimming from the side. I
mm,
would feel as if I had to be in in the environment,
mm,
in proximity, in
yes.
order to be able to attune to the information I'm getting from
Yeah.
the learners. Um,
Yes.
that's linked to my methodology, I suppose. But before I get onto that, you're really pushing a lot of my buttons here, which is good. So you talked about the learning tool, and I noticed this as well when you sent it through to me. You call it I am, I think, don't you? As in,
It's am I?
am I?
Am
That's
I?
it. Framed
Yeah.
as a question. Am I? Am I?
Mm,
Yeah. So now, what you're doing with that tool is, and you'll be aware of the campaign that I launched when I was at Sport England is now running, which is actually driven by this notion of young people having much more of a voice, choice, and to a certain extent, a a means by which to kind of define their own journey, their developmental journey. So everything you've spoken to speaks to that notion of, and it is called play their way, and you just said
yeah.
that the right, you use the word rights because it's based on rights. The right to say no. You just said insights will come to them if they play enough,
Mm,
and I'm really, really, in your point from a safety perspective, I'm really concerned that, and I've not fully grasped this, but in the aquatics space, this framing of voice, choice, and journey and rights
mhm,
is actually critical from a water safety perspective, from a drowning prevention perspective, because you could argue, and maybe this is my bias, I'd be interested in your view, but you could argue that the approach we currently take to learning to swim is so impoverished that it's dangerous or potentially dangerous. That
yeah.
might be a big statement, but I'm interested in your view.
Well, yeah. I have strong views on it, obviously. Otherwise, I wouldn't have been doing this for 15 years. And I've witnessed sad things going on next to me, with, colleagues that don't fully understand. And what is happening is that there's definitely a new understanding about the science underneath all of this, that trauma informed practices is what it's called.
Yeah.
Basically is now and is really starting to emerge in aquatics, which is wonderful. I'm absolutely delighted. What I will say though is that I see lots and lots of people who are desperate to help, with swimming, and they come along with their point of view about what will help, and they're misguided, but that's because of what they've embodied.
Right.
So that's what this tool is about as well. It's about educating those people to help them understand that there's now a massive world of science behind all of this, and that if they're trying to do something which is not appropriate for someone at their learning stage, then it's something that they really do need to address. They can't just keep sweeping it aside and saying, oh, it's too difficult for me to actually address this. My expertise is just about, you know, teaching people how to swim efficiently and swim faster, you know, because and I do feel sorry for some people who actually they've learned to swim with perhaps quite a lot of fear in their body. So they've had quite a lot of tension when they were young, and they've gone to lessons, and someone has managed to get them to learn to swim lengths, you know, to perform strokes beautifully, and they get lift in the water. You know, that sensation of traveling through the water so fast and so efficiently that you can feel yourself get lift in the water.
Yep.
That you get a real high from that.
Yeah. Yeah.
And people have people who watch as well. You know, everyone loves the Olympics. They love all of the aquatics races. I mean, I love watching them. They're amazing. And you get a buzz from it, from, you know, secondary buzz from them doing what they're doing.
Yeah.
And this is why it dominates, in my opinion. It's why it dominates aquatics.
Okay. I get it.
Yeah. So if you've only ever had that sensation of overcoming your fear, because some people can do it. It's not many people who can do it, can overcome their fear and just carry on swimming and get lift. Those people are actually relying upon, also they're relying upon external forms of safety, because a lot of the time they're not very good. They're not very good at stopping and resting in the water, in deep water. So there are some of them are really actually quite vulnerable in
Mm.
that regard.
Okay.
So being able to move through the water and being able to rest and stop in it are two different skills, and they require different approaches
Yeah.
if you think about it. Unless it's just an all mixed in like you and I had. You know, we just generally blended in. There was a bit of racing, bit of tag, bit of this, bit of that. Sometimes feeling lift, sometimes just laying there thinking, oh, I've worn myself out. Oh, I'm gonna have to rest now. And feeling fine about it, not needing to get out or touch the side or hang on to anything, just relying on yourself. So, yeah.
Yeah,
And
it's interesting. It's interesting. I've not really thought about that before, this notion that learning to move efficiently and quickly in water might actually be detrimental because you're then failing to understand what it takes to just be in water. Because you're right, actually. I think about that myself a little bit. You know, it can actually be relatively easy to make very, very little movement in water and yet still be in water safely. You know, I sometimes do that just for fun, you know, like just hang in water, but still breathe but without having to tread or anything like that, without having to use a lot of energy. Just I do wonder how many people have actually tried that. But equally, yeah, yeah. But equally, you know that the sense you talk about of lift and how kind of exhilarating that is. You're right, I do get that. But interestingly, one of the reasons I've always loved being underwater is it feels like flight. It's weightlessness.
yeah, it is. Yeah. I read a book about they tried to measure awe and wonder in astronauts, and they tried to give ordinary people the same sensation just by being in a chair in a capsule, um, looking out over, um, say, you know, where the shuttles and things have gone into space. So it had all these amazing images and footage, and it was sort of on a curved screen. So you felt it was like an immersive experience. And yeah, I mean, there's so much overlap with that sort of research with astronauts and of course they do a lot of their work underwater, you know, they train underwater in suits and everything. There
Yeah.
is so much overlap with the research base for all of that stuff. Yeah.
So we've talked a bit about the tool that you've developed. Now, one of the
Mm.
things I really like about it, I mean, firstly, you mentioned earlier on about this notion that, enabling individuals to define their learning experience based on their comfort level and all that sort of stuff, which is an
Yeah.
appeal, I think, to a non-linear approach. So the stuff you talked about with the Swimming Teachers Association, I know them well, and the fact that they're embedding things like water rescue, again, to be applauded, but still using a linear model where everybody is assumed to start at the same place and end at the same place. So that is, does have some flaws as a method of curriculum design or syllabus design. And then, but what I like about what you've created is, so traditionally, athlete curricula, or syllabus, usually is a list of things that the athlete should be able to do. And then the teacher or coach's role is to ensure that they can. And then success is defined about whether they can or they can't, which then creates this world where the athlete has no agency because the coach is on a mission based on how they're measured on can you do X, Y, and Z. Yours is entirely different because
Mm.
what it's doing is it's placing the athlete and their experiences central to how we would diagnose whether an individual is having a learning experience. You are drawing on the things that those individuals would say if they were learning. And there's lots in there because you talk about flow a bit as well. So
Mm.
can you unpack it a bit more? I've probably not done that quite justice.
No, it's great. Honestly, I love hearing your stuff as well. It's there's so much overlap, and there's been lots of good things happen over the years where someone has come along and talked about the zones of proximal development,
Yes.
and that type of model has been used, I think it was by Swim England that was introduced some time ago.
Yes.
And but I was thrilled at first, and I thought, oh, fantastic! This is going to really shake things up. And then I heard him say, you need to make them feel excited, and get it doesn't matter if there's a little bit of anxiety. And I thought, no, this is wrong. This is still leading from the front. This is still not letting the person decide. My body is telling me that I'd like to have a go at this, and or have a go at trying to lay on the bottom while the teacher's talking.
Yeah.
Can I sneak underneath? All of this stuff. It's all about who is in charge. It's all about how much do you trust the individual to know when they're ready to do something, or to know how much of it they can do. There's so much that could change for the positive side, where it can look quite messy, it can look unstructured, and it's about having small enough groups so that that sort of the appearance of unstructured activities being completely safe because the person is at the center of them, and that trust in that person is critical. If they're never going to be trusted in a pool, in a warm pool with clear water, how on earth are you going to expect them to navigate being outside, at a beach where there's rip tides, where there's all sorts of stuff going on, or in a lake or a river? Each of those water bodies as well are completely different the way they move. there's so many different rules, differences, to learn. That's one of the things that occupies the Life Saving Foundation a lot is about how to inform people about how different types of water move. And if you've never even sort of had a really comfortable relationship with the deep end of a pool, then, where are you going to go? It's worrying. So, in a way, it would be better if around the age of, uh, I would say, 10 to 13, children were shown the deep end of a pool and the shallow end, and learn and perfecting their flotation skills, perfecting their understanding of what happens with their body in the water and
Mm.
how much difference they need to make up. So some people, especially if there's someone who's not very buoyant, usually male, um, you know, there's no lungs in your legs. They drop down. People, that's another good thing that's been happening from the Life Saving Foundation work. There was a big influence on the RNLI, all of the organisations, the RLSS, the RLNI, um, you know, all turn up at the Life Saving Foundation conferences and talk about how to improve their provision. And yeah, the Float First campaign of the RNLI has been really, really positive, and it's doing great things because it's showing people how they're showing like a cutaway image of, so you see somebody floating in the water. They're not floating flat at the surface like a starfish. They're floating with their legs hanging down, and they may need to move their hands and their feet a little bit to maintain themselves near the surface if they're very thin. Um, all of this is powerful stuff because normally, you look at a swimming pool and people get this impression of what a float is. It's like this rigid, fixed starfish thing, and they've got no idea what's going on under the water at most of the time. And that's where all the information is for me. I must say, with adults, I spend sort of probably 70% of the time underwater looking at what's happening with adults, because the all of the tells, all of the signs about how confident they are, how comfortable they are in the extremities, in the hands and feet, and the face, how they hold their abdomen, and you can't see any of that from the side. It's just impossible. It's almost like we need cutaway pools, like with a glass side,
Yeah.
so that you can see that someone's comfortable. You can read them properly.
So do you teach with like a snorkel and mask so that you can observe the movement under the water?
No, I've got some beautiful. They're almost like a mask. It's a big frame goggle,
Right.
So yeah, it's got curved glass as
Right.
well.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's decent, really decent goggles. Um, yeah, I mean, obviously with children that becomes more difficult, but
Yeah.
children are different as well in that they have a real desire to move,
Yeah.
to learn in water, and that's absolutely fine.
Yeah.
My role then becomes sneakily introducing things that slow them right down
Yeah.
so that they start to feel and understand how the water works when they're at rest, because they need to know.
What kind
They
of things might you do there? Because I'm interested, sort of from a practical standpoint, what you might do to sort of slow them down, what constraints you might use.
Oh, it's things like, okay, can you swim in slow motion? I don't care what stroke you're using.
Mm.
Have a go at going as slow. Oh, can you go slower than that? Come on, we can have another go at that. See what happens. What happens if you do this? What happens if you do that? One of the other things as well is using the pool environment as a massive learning tool, like running around the sides of the corners underwater.
Mm.
Um, obviously you have to be on your side, and or another one is things like if you were about to do a push and glide, you built yourself up, you're like a coiled spring, you're about to push off, and then you notice out the corner of your eye that someone is about to swim in your path. So what are you going to do? Are you just going to carry on and whack into them, or are you going to stop? So then they have to experiment. And I say to them, oh, can you keep your feet on the wall? How do you keep your feet on the wall? What do you have to do? And there's myriad different ways of keeping your feet on the wall in that scenario. Another thing as well, which is really powerful, is how to manipulate things with your feet in the deep end.
Mm.
In a stationary vertical position, vertical floating. So I'd say put some bricks on the floor and say, right, can you build Stonehenge with your feet? So that involves going up and down in the water column. You're changing where your balance is. You're picking up an object that you would think would take you to the bottom, but it doesn't, because you're in water. It doesn't work like that. Just because it's heavy on land doesn't mean that it's not gonna, that it's gonna take you to the bottom. There's so much. It's just a whole different world of exploration that can go on.
Yeah, I love that. Love that. Wow. Um, my mind is blown and I could talk all night. Um, I've got to go out coaching soon, so I can't. But Andrew, I'm really glad we could have this conversation. I'm loving what you're doing. I do sense that there's a little bit of a movement building in the aquatics world of more people who are kind of okay, mapping on to this way of thinking. I've had what 4 or 5 on the show over the years. Kind of different alternative practitioners who are kind of operating in the aquatics landscape in a different way with a different articulation, and sometimes in the main, it's largely been about kind of like the performance end or the talent development end, but this has very much been in the kind of early stages of
Fundamental. Yeah,
fun.
the
Yeah, yeah,
fundamental end.
exactly. The experiential
Mm.
side. I can well imagine people are going to want to get in touch. So, what's the best way for somebody to reach out to you?
On my A to Z swim, there's a Facebook page. It's A and then a number 2 Z swim.
A2Z Swim. Okay.
Yeah,
So if they
yeah,
look up A2Z Swim on Facebook, they will know, they will find
yes,
you and be able to get in touch.
yeah,
Lovely.
yes.
It's been an absolute joy and a pleasure to chat to you. I'm loving it and hoping that the stuff that you do is starting to reach far and wide, and I will definitely do my level best to ensure that your stuff is sort of circulated. Have any
Mm.
of the people from the Play Their Way campaign been in touch, by the way?
No,
Okie
no, not
dokie.
yet.
I may well be making some introductions. Toot sweet.
Brilliant. Oh, thanks so much, Stuart. It's been a joy.
Thank you for
Lovely
coming
to
on
talk
and persevering with my scheduling nightmares. But
to
anyway,
you.
I really appreciate it. Thanks a lot.
Brilliant.